Good afternoon and welcome to today's Future of Work podcast. Today we're going to talk about the future of work being more flexible. We know that flexibility is central to achieving a more diverse, equitable, and more human-centric world of work. Nevertheless, we have seen a recent report by Mercer that actually reported that only just over 56% of organizations have reported that they have flexible working for all their employees. So in today's show, we have with us Mr. Hassan Habib. Hassan has multicultural and diverse experience, specializing in diversity, inclusion, equity, and he's very passionate about promoting the well-being at work. So Hassan, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Can you tell us, Hassan, a little bit more about what you do?
Absolutely. So I have a mainstream profession. I'm more into finance and investments. However, part of my passion is also to see organizations and practice at work holistically. And that's where I began working towards understanding and learning and even delivering, and then eventually practicing on well-being, diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, which we call the DEB model. And I currently I am a staunch enthusiast for these because data definitely suggests that having DEB, if done right, and well-being, it not only adds to productivity, but also it makes a business case for organizations. So glad to be here with you today as well, and look forward to an enlightening conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Hassan. We also have joining us here in the studio Dr. Vic Benuena, who is a professor in human resource management and labor market issues. Dr. Vic, absolutely delighted to have you with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. So flexible work, very difficult to define, right? We hear terms such as flexi work, remote working, part-time work, job sharing. It's, lots and lots of definitions really that we hear today. So let me start by Dr. Vic. What does flexible work mean for you, and what does it entail?
Yeah, it's something that has become so prominent in our discussion, particularly after the COVID-19. And it's sort of more reactionary debate in the field of organizational behavior, human resource management, and psychology. And that's purely because human beings are very weak in predicting what's going to happen in the future. We are more likely to react to things that have already happened. So the principles behind what is normally called flexi work is very expansive. Most of it would be either people are choosing to retire early or retire later, which is quite strange. People are asking for flexible rostering. In other words, they want to choose when they want to work. Other people are preferring to work from different locations. People are choosing to bring kids to the workplace or for the organization to have a designated area for them to look after their kids. So there's a lot of variables that go into the discussion about flexible work. I look at it as more a multivariate analysis rather than a single variable. There are so many things. And also, one of the key issues that come into the definition of flexible work is the geographical location. What counts as flexible in the OECD countries will be very different from what counts as flexible work in the Middle East or in the Far East. But I'm sure Mr. Hassan will probably have more to add to this definition.
Absolutely. So that's really great. Thank you very much, Dr. Vic. And moving on to, Hassan, what does flexible work mean for you?
So flexible work comes in many forms, right? So, for example, is telecommuting flexible? Hours flexibility is also flexible work. But then also what we have seen here in UAE, the Emirate of Sharjah implemented 4-day work week. And that is type of flexibility as well, where you have 3-day work, where you compress the full-time job and all the hours within the 4-day week and provide the 3-day weekend. So it's important to see how what flexibility entails for different, just like Dr. Peck mentioned, for different parts of the world in different geographies, and the definition also how OECD or other international organizations term it. But in my terms, flexibility is work-life fluidity, not necessarily a blend or not necessarily a balance, but it's more about fluidity, where we can work while we're living, so in quote unquote, because we're talking about work and life, or we are we can live while we're working. And we need to also understand here that about 30 to 40% of our time, officially speaking, in terms of number of hours, we spend at work. That is a big chunk. When we go home, we are less with the family during the weekdays than we are with work. So it's important to recognize this shift. In the past, I had, for example, my grandfather worked 3 hours a day, and he did really well for himself, right? Today, we all are doing 10 hours, 12 hours. There are people working 14 hours as well, and overtime. And it's important to now recognize that this is a practice, and this is something that is happening out there as a reality. And now how we can cater to make it better, because now it becomes a necessity. And you cannot just roll down the work hours. You will impact the productivity, you will impact the efficiency and effectiveness of the organization, the management, the employees, or so forth. So it's about creating that work-life fluidity. For example, Dr. Vid just mentioned people are looking at bringing kids to work. We had never heard that before. COVID, I believe, was a catalyst in this transition, in this trend. And what COVID taught us is that a lot of things that we expected it to happen over the next decade, we could have actually done it in 5 days, right? When COVID hit and the lockdown started, the first thing the organizations thought about is business continuity. And all the technology infrastructure that was supposed to happen over the next 5 years in order to enable remote work in the next 5 to 10 years happened in the span of less than a month. So COVID was a catalyst in this trend. And as a result, in 2021, there was a report that about 16% of the total of the global world had become completely remote. 16% of global organizations. Imagine global workforce, right? We're talking about the entire world here. And this wasn't a trend pre-COVID, where we were still used to seeing people go to offices. And because I come from a finance background as well, just to touch base upon office space now, for example, is low in demand in the West because no one wants to go to work. And you're an expert on Gen Zs. You know what the Gen Zs are looking forward to as well. And they are looking flexibility in work, flexibility in hours and days is something that Gen Zs put up as a demand when they seek work as well.
That's great. So, these are really important elements that you touched on, Hassan. Thank you very much for that. I think for me, really, we need to rethink what flexible work means, because we often think about it as, okay, it's about the number of hours we work, and the place, so location and hours. But it's really much more deeper than that. And in fact, we need to think also about the who does the work. So now there's, an increase in job sharing, for example, and the why. So, what people value most. So there's a lot of organizations now that are giving employees time off to work on projects that they're passionate about, for example, volunteering and things like that. So it's really more about than just location and time. It's the what, why, how, and where. In fact, one of the striking things that I've been reading is there was a report by Carers UK, and in that report they actually highlighted, this is really striking, that in the UK, 600 people are quitting their job every day because they have caring responsibilities and they were not able to manage working and caring responsibilities. These caring responsibilities were for elder people like parents or maybe family members who have disability. They actually had to quit their job. So imagine 600 people a day just, writing that, signing off that resignation. And I want to bring that question to you, Dr. Vic. How important is it for employees to sort of have that flexibility in their work, from, just to help them really manage their other responsibilities in life?
Yeah, there are about 3 different reasons why people work, isn't it? Traditionally, people will go to the office for socialization reasons. They meet friends, they meet colleagues, and they have a chat, and they get support, collegial support at work. People also work because they need to fulfill their financial obligation, but people also work because they want to upskill themselves. So these are probably the 3 main reasons why traditionally people were working. But there are constraints with some types of jobs. So if you think of a pilot, for example, they couldn't be working from home. If you think of a bricklayer, they couldn't be doing that from home. So in terms of what you've just asked about the implications for the individual, it depends on their needs, really. So going back to the 3 reasons I've mentioned, if it's financial, then you have very little ability to negotiate for that flexible work to work from home because the employer will be in charge of that negotiation. They will decide for you whether you come to the workplace or not. And I was reading something that an author suggested that when people sign up for the job, they sign up to go physically to the office. So regardless of what happened during the COVID, you have signed to come to the office. You didn't sign up to work from home. So you should still be coming to the office, which I fundamentally disagree with, because if the work could be done from home, then let the people do it from home. So for majority of people, and I can strike a balance here between gender, for example, there are women who could do both, as Hassan has said. They could leave, cater for their loved ones, and work at the same time. So they can kill 3 different things to the same stone, literally speaking. So for those people, working from home would be probably more meaningful, motivating to them, and also rewarding because they're able to do all the things that matter to them at home. In my profession and your profession, to some extent, and Hassan's as well, we could do most of the things that we've been doing from home. But I say that with a bit of caution, because we all know what happened during the COVID, where we became a little bit isolated. So although flexible work provides a lot of help to certain individuals, depending on who they are and what their needs are, there is a downside, slight downside to the element of socialization, which we all missed during the COVID. I would have loved to just walk to Dr. Mona's desk and ask about deadlines, when are the deadlines and what should we be doing this week? And she would just tell me. If I were working from home, taking the phone to call her, I have to find out whether she's free at the time, is she able to pick my phone call. So I think it's not going to change. Flexi work has a lot of advantages for lots of people. It's not going to change. I think it's going to increase, but it has to be done with some sort of care.
That's absolutely right, Dr. Vic. So it's looking really at employees' needs, because you can't have a one blanket fit all sort of flexible working.
Yes.
We all go through different stages in life, and organizations have to really cater for and maybe give employees the option to what they want. And that really shows that I think there's a real sort of drive for organizations, there's to have really that, flexible working options for their employees. Let's talk a little bit now about remote working. So we have all been part of an experiment during COVID for organizations. Personally, I was working from home for 2 full years. That was, part of worldwide experiment to see how we can function working remotely. Of course, this has now changed, after COVID. There is still, though, Hassan, a divide between what employees want and what is offered by organizations. According to a recent report that was just published by Mercer 2023, they sort of found out that around 42% of employees wanted to work full-time remotely, whereas if we look at what companies were offering, only 22% of organizations were offering full-time remote working. So, Hassan, why is there that gap? Why are organizations so reluctant to just fully immerse in full-time remote working?
That is a great question, right? So, if you see the flexible working as a concept, it affects 3 points or 3 entities. Entity 1 are the employees. Entity 2 is the management. And entity 3 is the organization itself, which then gets impacted positively or negatively, and eventually, of course, the profitability and the business. Now, when you look at how flexible working as a concept may impact each of these, where the primary challenges, now the gap, for example, first the question is, do employees want it? Absolutely. Some employees, however, are also of the opinion that a hybrid arrangement, a hybrid setup is much more productive because a lot of times an employee may not have the productivity tools to work remotely, but at the end of the day, he would want to do 2 days or 3 days from office, but then the remaining of the day from home or remotely. Now, the reason that there stays a gap where organizations may be reluctant at some point is primarily driven also by lack of oversight, perhaps. So not knowing, we are currently in an evolutionary phase. So we are evolving into new ways of working. We are not there yet. People living today are rather in transitionary stage. And hence, the management sometimes sees that as a risk for productivity. That if I don't have my team with me and I can't have an oversight over them, they may not be working. They may be doing something else. However, as there are organizations also who are not worried about the input of hours, but rather the output of work. So they're more task-oriented than they are time-oriented. And those are the progressive organizations. Those are the organizations also that people desire to work for. And we have seen organizations that have digitized and created a healthy work environment and provided remote working as a solution as well. Those are the organizations that the new graduates and the previous generation, including millennials and so forth, are looking to work with and work in. So lack of oversight is one that creates that resistance, perhaps. Second is security risks. Now, there are, for example, sensitive job natures, right? You have sensitive data. And hence, to access that data, you must be at work, or you must log into the local network, or you must use the computer provided to you within the building proximity of work. And hence, then that particular employee has to, or is asked to, rather come to work, although it may go against his will or wish, but that is one reason as well. So there are numerous reasons like that, but primary factors are this. One is culturally driven, and one is driven more about through the policies and procedures of the organization and the technology infrastructure available. I remember, in my time when COVID hit, the first about week or 2 weeks, the only communication tool we had was phone to get the tech infrastructure set up. Also is a task. And that is also one of the reasons perhaps organizations may be either unwilling or unable. Because they're two different approaches, right? One is perhaps organizations are unwilling, and that could be driven by cultural reasons or security risks, data breaches, for example. One is also that organizations are unable. They may not have the right infrastructure in place, especially when it comes to the bandwidth, technology, and so forth, in order to support the type of work being done remotely. So a lot of organizations went through that test during the COVID time, and while many worked through it, some were unable to, some were dented in terms of their business. But there are multiple factors that could cause resistance. And resistance, I'm not using the word here as a negative word, right? Resistance could be anything. It could be for the right reasons. And it could be perhaps culturally driven that needs change management. So those are the primary factors that happen to surface through time over the past 2-3 years.
Absolutely. So there's, you touched on the leadership, the culture of the organization, and some legal, and maybe security issues as well, which
Absolutely.
I think are really important. So despite that gap, Hassan, I think we've really come a long way because I actually did my PhD on remote working, but at that time, it was around 2004, 2005.
You're far ahead of time.
Yeah, it was not called remote working. It used to be called either home working or teleworking. Yeah. And the word tele comes from the Greek meaning far. So we had the telephone, television, and then teleworking. And frankly, everyone was, laughing at me and saying, why do you want to spend the next 5 years of your life looking at people who work from home? It was like, and little did I know that this is, one day we're all going to be doing that. So we have, I think, come a long way. And I remember even the participants that I interviewed talked about the struggles that they had to make people believe that they're working. They used to make fun of them, or you're sitting at home at that time playing solitaire on the computer or something. Neighbors would ring as, come on, you're not really working, you're sitting here at home. So I feel, although, studies like Mercer report have, there is a gap, but we've come such a long way. I mean, today there's more acceptance of remote working. So what we are seeing here then is that there's really like a social and economic imperative for organizations to allow this flexibility for their employees. In fact, the CEO of the CIPD, Peter Cheese, he even said, when we look at flexible working, it's not just when and where and how many hours. It should be embedded in all parts of the HR system, starting from recruitment. Yeah. And he advised organizations in their job adverts to put flexible working arrangements can be discussed. So, Dr. Vic, I want to ask you this question. What does that mean for employees to have that in their recruitment, in their job adverts, at a very early stage, before even bringing in the top talent in your company, to have that clause that we are an organization that we're open to discuss flexible work arrangements? What does that mean to employees?
Well, the shortest answer is it gives them choice. And choice is a big thing for employees. If you feel you are constrained, your motivation level is going to go down. So if employers put in their advert that hybrid work or flexible work can be discussed, it demonstrates that those organizations are more inclusive. They are more tolerant to variations or differences in human ability, structure, function, and all the other things that describe us as human beings, or for that matter, employees. So it seems to me, going forward from now onwards, now that flexible work has become such a common language that everyone is talking about, and Hassan said several organizations are implementing this, employees will probably shift more towards that direction, where they feel an organization gives them the choice to be able to decide how to work. Again, as I said earlier on, this applies to only some types of jobs, and not all types of job functions. But in countries where the economy is driven by services, this would be well welcomed by people who, or organizations who put this forward as a proposition to the employees. UK used to be a manufacturing country. Now we've moved to services. So within the services industry, giving a choice to employees is a big thing. And EDI, as I believe we'll be talking about later on, it's all over the place, regardless of which country you're looking at. If you read a report, Lloyds TSB in the UK has shut down several branches across the country purely because of a number of factors, as Hassan has mentioned, including people electing to work from home. And I believe the back office, I've never worked in the bank, but I believe if you work at the back office of a banking organization, you could do that from home, taking into account the potential risk to data and that sort of thing and fraud. But it's happening. Lloyds TSB has shut down branches. Many other banks are doing the same. Government organizations can work from home. Employees can work from home. So I think, unlike in the 1960s, Fordism or scientific management, where employees were seen as tools for the organization, now employees should be seen as assets. And not only assets, but respectable assets, in the sense that they are given a choice within reasonable limits.
That's great. I love that piece about choice and what you talked about EDI, which I'm gonna throw the question to Hassan. As an expert in EDI, you've done a lot of research. You've worked with companies to help them promote EDI and so on. Where does flexibility fit in to promote the EDI? Because if we unpack flexibility, it's not just about remote work. It could be offering part-time job. It could be job sharing. It could be, in fact, one report highlighted that the most popular flexible work was, taking leave when you want to go, say, to watch your children play sports or something like that. So it's not just about where we work and how many hours. It's much more than that. But how do you see this, Hassan? So these flexible work practices promoting EDI in organizations?
So the flexible work, it doesn't necessarily fall under one domain. The way I'd like to see it, which I often do, is holistic view. So two concepts which are prevailing in today's world and corporate world, which is flexibility in working and sustainability. I think both of these go hand in hand because they are interrelatable and they have intersections in terms of one affects the other in many ways. So it's important to see it holistically. So you're looking at throughout. If you were to put it as a matrix, so the flexibility would be on horizontal and sustainability, and all the other pillars will be vertical pillars. So it affects at every level. And now talking about, for example, like Dr. Vic was mentioning about some companies have implemented. Today we have organizations, especially multinational organizations and local organizations, that are doing every week at least 2 to 3 working days from home as part of employment. And this is not in the contract, perhaps it's not explicitly mentioned, it's just practice. And while you were having a discussion with Dr. Vic, I was thinking, perhaps 5 years down the road, we'd be like we are talking about work-life balance and flexibility at work as a separate concept from a mainstream work culture. I think 5 years down the road, coming to office will be a separate pillar of discussion and will not be mainstream anymore. Rather, when you say, I work in X place, today, the moment I tell you that I work over here, the first visual that you get in your head is that he goes to that particular office. But that won't be the case perhaps in the next 5 years, where the first instinct of a person would be that to assume that he's working from anywhere. So it won't be just work from home, it'll be home from work, and so forth. So when you talk about, for example, I believe flexibility at work clearly hits at well-being. It clearly hits at inclusion, because inclusiveness and inclusivity is paramount and core to flexibility at work. Because it has the potential, if not implemented right, it has the potential to, like Dr. Vic was mentioning earlier, to exclude certain people and isolate them from the equation. Now, if that happens, then what you're looking at talent retention challenges. You're looking at even talent attraction challenges. People may not want to work anymore with your entity because they know, for example, their work practices are not great or not inclusive enough. So it's part of. I've always seen flexibility as something that hits every pillar across the board. The moment we put it in one bucket, we isolate it, and I don't think it is an isolated concept, or it should be. It should be seen holistically, even from a business perspective. Right? There are numerous reports by Gartner or otherwise as well, which indicate that there is a business case for flexibility at work, be it remote working, be it providing flexibility in hours. I mean, back in the days, I remember you had to be 8 o'clock, you have to be at work, and you're just done. By 4 o'clock, you're done. There were a lot of numerous ways to track that. But a lot of organizations are ditching all that because they've realized this is not productive. And what they're now measuring employees on is productivity levels. So no longer is input an issue. It's more about what can you produce. If you can produce for me what I need in 4 hours, great. But if you need 8 hours, great. That's fine. There's no issue with that. But give me the output. And the metrics are being now it's being trickled down to KPIs, for example. I mean, I've been associated and across numerous organizations that have no culture of micromanaging or when are you coming in, when are you going out, or even from a team perspective, your online managers, for example, they're not looking at that anymore. Okay, where have you been? I didn't see you today, or you're 2 hours late. No. But at the end of the day, as long as he gets what is intended and what is expected and the goal is being achieved, I think the industry practices are such that that's the focus now. There's a lot of focus on productivity. There's a lot of focus on diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, because through COVID, we came across a lot of well-being challenges across many people, even went through mental health challenges, for example, depression, for instance. So inclusion and belonging is what takes care of that as well. A lot of organizations rolled out, as a result, programs for employees to cope up with those conditions and help them. And they added as an extra benefit, although many organizations did not have it as in, for say, health insurance benefit. But some organizations went a step ahead and said, no, our employees need it. We will pay for it. So they partnered with third-party partners. It was not part of their health insurance, but they partnered with third-party partners, and they paid for it, and they made sure that their employees have access to the help that they need. So that was commendable. And I think that is... It's gaining momentum. Since 2020, COVID lockdowns, 2021, we started recovering. Today, it's mainstream. An organization with lower diversity scores or inclusion scores or sustainability scores is always seen as an organization not progressive enough, right? And there's a reason for that perception as well. So with the changing trajectory and changing, let's say, even Gen Zs coming into the workplace, I think organizations are adapting this as a more mainstream and across the board rather than just putting it into one single bucket.
So these are really important elements here, like I like the holistic approach that you're thinking about, Hassan. But, if we think about it from organization perspective, they will say, well, we really need to see our employees sometimes. We need to see them. We need to make sure that they're collaborating, that there's teamwork, there's, ideas buzzing, that office buzz feeling. So what's your perspective on that, Dr. Vic? Like, should there be, for example, certain days where people have to be seen in the office, just to, do you think it's a challenge to build teams when everyone's working remotely?
Well, as human beings, when something is new to us, we are always resisting its application. And so remote work, it's not something that's always been there. As I said, in the 60s, it wasn't there because most of the productive activities in almost every country was either agrarian, manufacturing. Then we started looking at services. We started trading, and we started offering services. So things have changed slightly. But yes, it really largely depends on the organization and sort of culture that they want to deliver to their employees. So if they are highly micro-oriented, they would want to see their employees come to the office every time. But there is a caveat to this. As we know, in Japan, for example, the concept of karoshi, which is death by overwork, is stuck in the 1960s. It's not a phenomenon that should be in 2023. If you work so much, long hours, 11 hours per day, probably more, 60 hours per week in Japan, that's acceptable. But then that leads to a consequence. It leads to well-being issues to the extreme of people dying, either in the office or they having challenges and they die as a result. I think that's an extreme application of traditional view of the office or the workplace. And finding a balance, as Hassan has said on numerous occasions, I think would be the way forward. So I wouldn't prescribe that all organizations should have people working remotely. I would say that it's highly dependent on the context. But if it can be done, if people can be productive from home, let's do it. Let's embrace that. Let's move forward with it. As a matter of fact, productivity can be measured in different ways. You can measure that by time. If you're working in operations, you might measure that by the throughput time or customer satisfaction or taste of food if you're in the food industry. So there are so many variables. So organizations have to look at what variable is more meaningful to them as well as their employees and find a nice balance between that to decide what proportion of work should be done in the office and what proportion should be done from home. The gig economy is embracing the whole world, and it's not going to go away.
So adding to that, I'd just like to ask you one question. So in the world today, we are in 2023. 100 years ago, how did we travel to work? We walked, or we took a ride on an animal, be it horse, camel, or otherwise, depending on where we lived, right? Then came the invention of motorized transportation. What happened then? People still went to work. They went to work in a different manner. Was the work still done? Was it productive? Was the output the same, if not more? Answer is yes. That's why we are where we are today. So think of remote working as a tool of going to work. Instead of you driving the car, if you're not driving the car, you're adding to the sustainability index, right? And that's one point. Other is the time consumption, the traffic on the road, the frustration, the mood, the mental state when you arrive at work or otherwise. So as and when cities get more crowded, remote working is the only way to get more mainstream and continue with the productivity. Today, for example, I had someone tell me, I was having this discussion about going to work 100 years ago on foot, and we were 3-4 friends sitting together, and one of them commented, it's like, when 100 years ago when my great-grandfather went to work on foot, he would get there in 10 minutes. Today I drive a car and it takes me 1 hour to get there with traffic. And then I put forth a question. I'm like, imagine if the crowd was the same and you still had to walk, right? Because the city is expanded in terms of distance. Like what takes you 1 hour today, even if there was no traffic, it would take you 10 minutes drive. That means how many minutes walking, right? So the point being that as we get more dense, right, this becomes the requirement and the need of time. It's no longer an option. So those organizations that still see this as an option, as a good to have, or let's say as an okay to have, but I don't want it anymore, I think relating to the analogy I just gave, then they will be unreachable to a lot of people, to a lot of talent. And if you're located today in a remote area of the city, you're not going to commute 2 hours to work or 3 hours or 4 hours, right? Remote working does exactly that. It shortens the distance between you and the talent. So talent can approach you and you can approach talent. And the moment you don't have it, and this is, keeping in mind, this is where we are heading. And if that distance is long, talent will not approach it, would not even want to approach it.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's really tapping into talent, that's really key. But I feel still, Hassan, that will take some time for, organizations to change their culture. There's really still that element that, oh, he's not in the office today, so he's having a day off, where actually you could be so productive, doing a lot of really good things. I mean, personally, I'm more productive when I work from home because, I save on transport, as you said. I mean, and that's how, in fact, remote working started in the US. It's really for the, petrol crisis and to save the commute time. There was a big campaign by British Telecom where they were promoting, don't be a commuter, stay at home with a computer. At that time it was really still new.
Yeah.
But I feel it's really the leaders, the culture, and that takes some time to actually change.
Sure.
From
Absolutely.
what I've seen, yeah.
And what you need to see is where's this stemming from? Managerial anxiety, right? So just because something is not in front of me does not mean it's not working. Today, for example, someone owns a manufacturing plant and he's sitting at home. He can't see his machinery working, but he knows it's being the productivity and the production is continuing. That is the level of trust you need to have in your team. Otherwise, it's not a team, right? So, and that's where the diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging come into place, is to have that cohesive teams and the trust factor among them in order to know that even if I close my eyes or if I'm traveling or if I'm not there personally for a long time, the show will go on because I've got the right people in place. Now, who hired the people? For example, just for the example, if I'm the manager, I hired the people. And if I don't trust my people, that's my problem. Like, I hired the wrong people. So I'm the one to blame, not the people.
Yeah.
So when in the hiring process, you must have embedded, skill sets, for example, requirements by the candidates that they're based on their, let's say, character or their personality test, which determines that they're friendly to to diversity, inclusion. They're friendly, they're trustworthy. For example, they display those kind of characteristics in them as part of the hiring process, because you need to trust the person. I, as an organization, I want things to be produced. I want productivity, right? My end goal is productivity. Whether it's in front of me or not, it shouldn't matter. But if it does matter to me, then that's a cultural challenge.
I think that trust element is really key, and I see trust being at the heart of flexibility, because when you offer flexibility, it means you trust your employees.
Absolutely.
And if you trust your employees, they're more productive, they're more loyal, because you could just work from anywhere, anytime, whatever suits your needs. And that element of saving commute is so, I think it's really, really key. I mean, Dr. Vic would probably know, like, living in the UK, commute, you would normally, it's not strange to commute 1 hour going, 1 hour coming from work.
Yeah.
That's 2 hours a day, times 5, that's 10 hours a week. I would personally love to have 40-hour check back into my life, per month. And, it's really, really important, that point that Hassan mentioned. I want to now just talk a little bit, Dr. Vic, about the four-day week that, we, of course, have a 4.5 day here in the UAE. Let's think about this a little bit. Do you feel it's living up to its hype? Or do you feel maybe actually it's just, repackaged and actually employees work longer anyway when they go back home?
The main issue with that is the inability for us to disconnect from our devices that are the tools that we use at work. So we are constantly looking at our mobile phones and checking our emails. We are constantly undetached from our laptops and Apple devices. So my computer, for example, goes off every time I receive an email. So it's almost impossible to say that I only work, if I were in that situation, I only work 4.5 days or 4 days. I actually work more than that because, we all log into the laptops and mobile phones and reply emails at the weekend. So on the average, I believe, regardless of the fact that quantitatively we've put down four days per week, we're doing in excess of the 4 days. These ideas were pioneered largely by Scandinavian countries, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and so on and so forth. And it's now catching on with the rest of the world. And it's such a privilege to have that implemented in the UAE. Sharjah has even a much more generous allocation in terms of number of days that people work. I don't see in the media or any reported articles that complain that the 4-day work is not working. Who decided previously that we should be doing 5 days anyway? I mean, someone somewhere, I believe there's a history behind that. I probably read something about that before, but I've forgotten. But someone decided that we shouldn't be working 7 days, we should be doing 5 days. This could also be as a result of our Judeo-Christian background where in the West, for example, religion was at the core of weekend activities. So people wanted to make the weekend free. But as we know now, there are more business activities all over the world. And if we can do all at the same time, if we can do the religion, we can do personal stuff, we can do work-related stuff, then it makes sense to reduce the number of times we go to the office. In summary, would I want more organizations with less physical hours in the office? The answer is absolutely. Because I see no evidence to suggest that productivity goes down. Elon Musk tried to force people to come back to the office, and it backfired. It nearly backfired, as a matter of fact. So I think we are now in an era where there is a lot more power, in quotes, in the hands of employees. And that's because we have a very heavy population called Gen Zs, who define, in India, for example, there's 27% of Gen Zs in India. Globally, Gen Zs are 21%, depending on what statistics you're looking at. So they are driving the new things that we are doing. They're driving environmental sustainability. They're driving EDI. They're driving ethics in all dimensions. So it's not going to go away. Look at Japan. The OAPs, the old age people, who still work in the workforce, are about 56%. That's a large proportion compared to, say, 400 million people in India who are ready to work. So I think it's not a hype. I think it's here to stay, and we just have to deal with it.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Vic. So that, you mentioned, your laptop ringing every minute you get an email and you feel like an urge. It's like someone's calling you. You have to answer to that. I want to now ask, Mr. Hassan, as a well-being, you're passionate about well-being. You really promote that in organizations. What tips can we have from you in trying to really disconnect? Because honestly, it's very, very difficult, whether it's weekends, evenings. I know that sound of, email message coming. It could come at 10 o'clock at night on a Friday. It could come on Saturday morning. What tips can we have? Because it really does affect our well-being, our mental health, actually our physical health as well. So from your point of view, any tips we could use actually will be great.
See, we need to have a clear cut between when we are working, when we are not, especially when in the later part of the day. My wake-up call was one day when I came home and my 6-year-old looks at me and I go like, I want to hug him and hold him. And he looks at me, he goes like, who are you? He literally asked me, who are you? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you're never home, so who are you? So, and I realized at that point that even when I am home, right, a lot of times I'm checking my emails or looking at the communications, or maybe I just remember something, so I'll open my laptop, log in remotely, and try to get some work done because I may need it the next day. But in the process, what I realize also is that the work never finishes. All right. So what you need to pay attention to is even if something that you're doing at 8 p.m., 7 p.m., 10 p.m., I see emails floating around a lot after working hours. The actual work or the action on that particular email will only be done the next day. So whether you reply at 10 p.m. or you reply the next day at 9 a.m., the effect is the same because no one's going to action it, no one's going to work on it, nothing's going to happen up until the next day morning. So it's important to realize in terms of, okay, if I am investing this time at home or off my time off my family, rather giving it to time at work, even at 9 p.m., is this investment generating the return that I seek out of it? Is the work actually being done? If it's an emergency, there's a crisis situation, I totally understand, right? A lot of times it happens, especially in manufacturing plants, there's a fire or so, and you have to run because you're responsible. You're the either the CEO or the executive or the head of the department, and you go look at it. But I'm talking about regular routine, right? So it's important to understand what kind of is this particular investment generating the return for me I need. Have a clear-cut breakout. So for me, the rule is work hours plus 1 hour. I'm happy to entertain calls. I'm happy to entertain emails. Even if I'm not at work, I may leave at work sharp at my time. But I still give that flexibility of another 1 hour that if something comes through, I attend to it. But after that, you must be able to allocate the time to people who deserve. I learned it also a hard way. I've had experience in my family of someone passing away very close within the family. And I realized at the end of the day, that's the circle that stays with you. Mm-hmm. And just like the concept of that, that are you eating to live or living to eat? Mm-hmm. What applies here is, are you working for the family or is the family just there and your work is your family? Right? So what's your priority? So set your priorities right. And COVID taught us that, and I think Dr. Vic can even further add to this. It's the setting of priorities. I know a lot of people, a lot of employees, a lot of organization leaders, CXO levels or owners or entrepreneurs who went back and set their priorities against, like, you know what, I learned through this COVID, this doesn't matter anymore. And it's not a business decision, it's more of a social and life decision. So it's about setting those social and life decision priorities right, and then understanding that the business is going to go on. You already give it officially about 30% of your time or 40% of your time per day. And if you're giving it more than 50, 60%, then you have family as well. There comes a day that takes a toll on them, and then it backfires on, and then you undergo. How many, for example, we've seen, in the Amazon, for example, Jeff Bezos went through family challenges. Microsoft, Bill Gates went through family challenges. Why? Right. So it's about while there may be other factors, but there are also factors relating to work, relating to time, relating to it affects your interpersonal relationships with your close ones. So again, looking at priorities. Are you working to provide, or are you just the family is just there and your relationships are just there, and work is your priority and family. So you need to set your priorities right. You need to have cutoff times and implement it at a personal level. So everyone knows, for example, when I'm working with people, that Hassan will not answer his calls on weekends or after certain hours on weekdays unless it's an emergency. And that expectation has been set. Was it set through a paper with an agreement or service level agreement? No, but it was set through culture. I imposed that culture that everyone needs to have that time, not just myself, but the entire team. So I shouldn't be calling even if I'm managing that person, I shouldn't be calling that person outside working hours. And if I do for emergency purposes, I apologize first, and then I say, is it the right time to talk? Can you entertain this call? And if the answer is yes, then I go ahead. So it's about realizing and having that considerations as well.
That's
You're
great
right.
advice. Great advice, Hassan. Thank you. I think just before we move on to Vic, Dr. Vic,
Yeah.
I read once, someone said that the only people who remember that you work at night are your children. It's not your employer or your colleagues. It's your children who will remember that. And, that kind of goes with the story that you said. What could you add to that, Dr. Vic? It's very interesting to set these boundaries, isn't it?
It is. From discussion point of view, it sounds very doable. From corporate point of view, it comes down to what Hassan has said, that he expects people not to respond to emails at the weekend or outside of office working hours. He does the same thing. So I think most people will respond to emails, or they have the temptation to check their emails or pick calls because of anxiety. We are obsessed. We are also frightened that until you open the email, you wouldn't know what's in there. So that level of anxiety and confusion, or perhaps doubt, forces us to constantly be looking at our mobile phones. But another point is this, that our emails are integrated to mobile phones, and mobile phones are constantly, I believe we spend about 60% of our day holding our mobile phones. So that becomes almost unavoidable. So it comes down to the organization creating a policy that will be quite clear on email response expectations. I have worked for a company before, and the vice chancellor constantly sends an email saying it's unprofessional to send email at the weekend and after 5 p.m. And I love that vice chancellor. It doesn't have to be made as a policy. It can be down to culture. If my manager expects that I do not touch my devices on the weekend or after work, then they shouldn't also send email after these time parameters. So at some point, it has to be some sort of a policy coming down to organizations. Other than that, giving the chance to individual managers, some will still do it and expect you to be spending your time after 8 p.m. responding to emails. For some of us, it's a bit difficult because we deal with both colleagues, our managers, and students. And students sometimes, particularly if you teach students from different geographical locations, they will send email at any time and expect you to answer within 3 hours. So again, it's down to policy. Those policies are not in place yet. Maybe managers listening to this discussion will start thinking about what sort of policies to put in place to ensure our lives are more balanced than they currently are.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that quote, that do not send emails after working hours or weekends. That's it's a good culture, isn't it? Looking after the well-being, unless, of course, it's something urgent.
Yeah.
There's nothing more frustrating than getting an email at 10 o'clock on a Friday evening, which, sometimes...
We've all been there.
Yeah. So I want to say also that, if there's no policy, as Hassan said rightly, we should create our own boundaries. There are sometimes also organizations that go a step further. I know some companies, for example, when you're on leave, you're actually not allowed to respond to any email. It's actually frowned upon. You get bad points or something. Like if you're on leave and you're not expected. You're not expected. It's actually frowned upon, as I said. So it's all about, as I said, the culture, the leadership. But what we've seen in this discussion, I think, is the importance of flexible work, which is really at the heart of achieving diversity. It's improving well-being. It's creating a more inclusive working place. A more human-centric workplace, because we are not static. Our work is static. It's 9 to 5 in most organizations. But we evolve in life. We go through different stages, whether it's having children or looking after elderly people or maybe taking up studies or whatever it is. You know, the work should be quite flexible to meet the needs of the future workplace. And with that note, I think we wrap up our episode on the Future of Work podcast. So once again, thank you from me, Dr. Mona Mustafa. Thank you very much, Mr. Hassan Habib.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me over.
Thank you. And Dr. Vic Benuena, thank you very much for these great insights.
It's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.